This spectacle was so hideous that even the most jaded districts refused to look away. In the city of Tarsea, year 482, beneath a sun that blazed like a coin being stamped into history, a child was turned into currency for an empire hungry for spectacle. She was 7 years old when they stripped her of a name and called her merchandise. From that moment, the life of the woman who would be called Empress was being written in the wash of public shame, private calculation, and laws crafted by men who believed spectacle was governance. What followed was not merely a rise to power, but a rewriting of institutions with learned cruelty at its center. How does one who was bought and pelted with coins become the architect of purges and legal edicts that reshaped an empire? This is the dark journey of an empress forged by humiliation, trained in the intimacy of exploitation, and turned into history's most dangerous hand at the throne. Contemporary chronicles, surviving edicts, and fragments of mosaic art confirm the outlines of what unfolded and help us trace the road from the arena to the purple. The city of Tarsea sat on a river that smelled of fish and clay, a trade hub where factions vied openly for contracts and influence. Factions known as the House of Maron, the Guild of Spectacle, and the Ivory Court each controlled a slice of daily life. The House of Maron supplied troops and oversight to the amphitheaters. The Guild of Spectacle provided performers and trafficked young bodies, and the Ivory Court certified edicts that kept profit streams open. Laws allowed private sponsorship of public punishment in return for tax exemptions. City officials like Governor Armin, Magistrate Lysandra, and Tribune Vallon profited when the crowd demanded flesh and the calendar demanded distraction. The legal framework was blunt and procedural. To commodify a child required an edict of resort which defined custody transfer as a contractual obligation assignable to a spectacle sponsor. That procedure required a notarized statement, 2 witnesses, and a public registration at the market tribunal. In 300 characters, the edict made trafficking legal by folding it into municipal revenue law. The result was a state where the marketplace and the court were indistinguishable, and where children became ledger entries. Names like Marco the Broker, General Cassius, who oversaw security, Priestess Helena, who blessed contracts, Lady Sora, who adjudicated fines, and Scholar Etta, who kept the ledgers, recur across accounts. They were not peripheral. They were the gears that turned a system that profited from pain. Her origin was small and ordinary in a way that made the tragedy more inevitable. She was born in a mud brick house on the edge of the merchant quarter. Her father, Thomas, sold herbs and mended rope, his hands rough like the cords he worked. Her mother, Ilara, embroidered trimmings for market cloaks and kept a small lamp that smelled of resin. The family fit into the city without standing out until a debt collector named Marco of the Coinfold arrived and took the rope vendor to the ledger. Tomas was accused of stealing a municipal staple, and the fine equaled 3 years of their life. Tomas argued. He was beaten. He died on a cart with the smell of oil and dust in his mouth. Ilara was left with a child and a ledger stamped in black ink. In the first paragraph of what would become a long backstory, the poverty was not simple lack, but a state produced by policies that taxed repair and celebrated spectacle over subsistence. In the second paragraph, the reader understands the specific calculus. Young children could be entered into contracts when a household defaulted. Ilara signed because a magistrate assured her that the child would be sheltered and trained and that a small monthly stipend would keep her alive. She signed while the sound of the square hammered a rhythm into her bones. In the third paragraph, the betrayal is emotional and anatomical. Ilara watched her daughter led away, smelling of starch and sweat, and a promise was handed like a coin. In the fourth paragraph, the trauma imprinted itself into attention and learning. The girl learned to watch faces, to memorize the tilt of a jaw that meant pity, to taste the salt of tears and then hide them under laughter. These 4 mini-paragraphs form the human kernel that explains later calculation and cruelty. Names recur here: Tomas, Ilara, Marco, Magistrate Lysandra, and a boy named Yorin who tried to slip coins through the bars and was punished for theft. Their small acts and small betrayals seeded the architecture of her future. The public humiliation came a ceremony because the city insisted on meanings. On market day, the amphitheater stank of sweat, fried oil, and unwashed wool. The sound of leather straps tightened around a throat, the murmur of the crowd, the high metallic rattle of coins, and the slap of a palm meeting thigh were the score to which the child performed. She was led into an arena ring that was more ritual than punishment. The crowd threw coins and scorched fruit. Her skin tasted of citrus and ash. The master of spectacle, named Varon, shouted the tally of the sponsorship and introduced patrons like Lady Sora and General Cassius, who offered patronage as if it were charity. The exchange was a transaction that taught her to equate flesh with value and silence with safety. Sensory details mark each moment: the glare of torches, the crush of bodies, the sour scent of spilled wine, the coarse linen against her bare shoulders, the metallic cold of coin against her skin, the taste of iron in her mouth when she ate in secret. The crowd called her names in a chant that both dehumanized and baptized her. She learned then to read how a face softened when a spectator remembered his own child, how a hand tightened when a man saw arrival. Secondary figures moved through this scene. Marco counted. Varon barked orders. Priestess Helena pronounced the blessing that made the act legal. Magistrate Lysandra recorded the contract. And Yorin huddled in the cheap seats with eyes like coal. The traumatic pedagogy of spectacle was systematic. Each ritual reinforced the marketplace, the law, and the social appetite for dominance. Years of enforced performance became an education in observation, mimicry, and manipulation. In dim wings behind the amphitheater, she learned languages of touch and tone. She learned from older women who were called concubines in polite speech and practitioners in private. Names like Sarah, Malek, Hadria, and Oren taught her how to bend voice, how to make a laugh sound natural when it was not, how to move a shoulder so a wealthy man would assume consent. The training was cruel but sophisticated. Sensory training included the way a perfume announced wealth, how the scent of rosewater could cover the smell of sweat for a night, how the texture of silk over the palm delivered a promise that naked skin could not. She listened for the rhythm of sentences that betrayed insecurity. She tasted wine to memorize which house favored bitter blends and which liked sweet. Dialogue in the training rooms grew terse and loaded with lessons. Sarah said, "What does he fear?" She answered, "Money." Malek said, "How do you find the moment?" She answered, "When the eyes drift." Hadria said, "And if they suspect?" She answered, "Distract them with praise." Oren said, "What about power?" She answered, "Power is the quiet corner where orders are given." The exchanges multiplied until each lesson was a muscle. This was education by pain and by the exploitation of intimacy. It taught her the instruments of seduction as if they were tools of statecraft. By performing desires, she accrued knowledge. By withholding herself, she learned leverage. The stage and the bed became schools of psychology, where she learned to convert vulnerability into currency and observation into strategy. Escape arrived in the shape of an offer that smelled like an open window. A merchant named Corin, who trafficked in fine cloth and had friends in other ports, offered apparent rescue. He purchased her contract from Varon and took her across borders to courts where languages shifted like rugs. The outward trappings promised luxury, amber oils, and new costumes. But these courts taught different rules about alliances and reputation. On ships, the gulls smelled like salt and fish, and the wood taste lingered on the tongue. In foreign courts, she encountered different rituals. Concubines there had loyalties to houses rather than to the crowd. She studied letters, learned to read mosaics, and catalogued the names of patrons. Scholar Edda introduced her to discreet reading sessions where laws and chronicles revealed how power was written and rewritten. She learned that a decree could cement a fortune, or an accusation could destroy a rival. The sensory world of this period included the cool marble of miniature courts, the clink of fine glass, the hush of libraries where dust settled like judgment, the sweet oil of citrus candles, and the prick of cold air on skin after baths. This was a space of apprenticeship. She learned diplomacy, how to write a note so it read like praise and a command at once, and how to make rivals underestimate a woman who had been labeled commodity. Her re-entry into central politics was not romantic, it was calculation. The man she would seduce was Governor Armin, first in title and then in naive trust. The courting was public theater with private rules. The first exchange was staged. He complimented her embroidery on a robe. She laughed and brushed the compliment off with a phrase that made him feel seen. They spoke in the public parlors where tapestries muffled the clink of cups. Their dialogue escalated into a courtship that was both genuine and engineered. 8 separate exchanges track their move from curiosity to entanglement. He said, "Your eyes remember everything." She said, "They remember what pays attention." He said, "Do you trust me?" She said, "Trust is negotiated." He said, "Will you be mine?" She said, "Ownership is a legal term." He said, "Are you afraid?" She said, "Only of being invisible." He said, "I can protect you." She said, "Protection is an instrument." He said, "Will you marry me?" She said, "If marriage carries power." He said, "What power do you seek?" She said, "The power to name." Each short line carried weight, and each pause taught her how to modulate sorrow into threat. The court whispered at the scandal. Lady Sarah and General Cassius debated honor and rumor. Magistrate Lysandra argued procedural objections, and Tribune Valens stoked factional alarms. Scandals required juristic handling. The court invoked an edict of matrimony that transferred social status and political rights in a document filed at the Ivory Court. The procedure required 3 witnesses and a public proclamation. This legal choreography was technical and cold, and it folded personal ties into instruments of office. When she finally held influence, she converted the intimate knowledge of abuse into a method of statecraft. She designed spectacles that inverted humiliation into loyalty. She engineered trials where accused rivals had to confess under theatrical pressure and die in ways that taught the public to fear betrayal. A moment of tension came when her childhood friend Joran accused the governor of a crime. The accusation pulled her between memory and rule. For 2 short paragraphs she wrestled internally with the choice. In the first, she remembered the market smell and the feel of coin against skin, the small boy passing notes. In the second, she realized that public justice could be used to eliminate threats while cementing her image as a defender of order. The inner debate lasted minutes, and notes of throat constriction, a metallic taste of adrenaline, and the echo of past laughter. She chose the court. The purge that followed was meticulous. Lists compiled by scholar Edda, public confessions instigated by the stagecraft learned in the amphitheater, tribunals presided by Magistrate Lysandra, and enforcers led by General Cassius made the machinery run without flaw. The sensory palette of the purge included the scent of smoke from burning records, the hollow sound of cell doors, the rough rope biting into skin, and the cold geometric silence after executions. This was revenge with administrative efficiency. The climax was not a single explosion, but a planned inversion of the spectacle that had made her. She convened a public festival and invited the city. The arena became a theater of law. She sat in the purple box where emperors were reviewed and watched while names were read aloud. Each name triggered a flash of private memory for her. Voices rose, coins were no longer thrown at bodies, but at legal causes she supported, and the city felt reordered. The massacre she engineered was surgical. Soldiers under General Cassius sealed exits. Accused officials were paraded and then removed, their families stripped of position. The noise of the crowd was a pageant one moment and a funeral bell the next. In 2 paragraphs that stretched like a held breath, the tension built and released. The first paragraph described the assembling of lists, the handing over of warrants, and the hush before the reading. The second paragraph described the reading, the riot, the clash of metal, the acrid smell of flames on curtains, and the sudden silence that followed as a new order sat in the ash. She used knowledge learned from her years of compulsion to predict reactions, to turn pity into suspicion and suspicion into exile. The crowd learned to fear quick smiles and to respect a woman whose past had taught her the anatomy of applause. The consolidation that followed was both reform and purge. She promulgated new edicts that regulated public festivals, channeled spectator donations into state coffers, and criminalized unauthorized sponsorship of punishments. These laws bore her mark and changed the municipal ledger. In the first month, she reorganized the Ivory Court so that registrations required additional oversight from a body she controlled. In 3 months, she replaced key magistrates with allies and reissued holdings for patronage under terms that favored state control. In 6 months, she had restructured guilds and redirected profits into public infrastructure while quietly erasing rivals. The epilogue of her rule shows contradictory outcomes. On the one hand, she ended the worst forms of street market trafficking by folding them into state monopolies. On the other hand, she formalized institutional power that made dissent lethal. Memories of Ilara and Tomas persisted in private rooms. The city rebuilt in her image. Monuments rose that showed her in the purple cloak, the mosaic eyes cold and precise. Scholar Edda compiled official histories that emphasized order. Lady Sora wrote memos about philanthropy. General Cassius oversaw parades to honor the dead and to remind the living. Her legacy was a ledger of reforms and myrrh. Executions, a set of laws that limited private spectacle while expanding state spectacle through parades and public justice. If this story moves you, know you are not alone. If you watched the sequence of spectacle and policy with a tightening in your chest, take a moment to reflect and share one line in the comments starting with "I would do" or "I would change." The question is simple and the act is communal. What would you do if you discovered that institutions you trusted had profited from the suffering of children and then woven that profit into law? Share one sentence about a change you would make. The best comments will be read and will shape a future conversation about accountability and reform. We will read perspectives from across the city and across the world to understand how different cultures reckon with a legacy where intimacy becomes policy. Now we return to the narrative to trace what happened after reform and how memory and power continue to intertwine. In the long view, the Empress who began as property became a sovereign who wrote new property into law. Her campaigns of assassination became legal purges, and the architecture she built outlived her body. When she died, the city paused and measured the cost. Statues showed a woman whose eyes looked forward and who, more than anything, had learned to convert pain into order. The moral question that lingers is not whether she was cruel, but whether an institution that breeds cruelty deserves reform or abolition. Her final act, the construction of a hall for orphans funded by the new treasury, smelled of cedar and incense and read like contrition. Yet the hall was overseen by officials whose names appeared on purge lists. The closing image is of a mosaic in the central plaza depicting a coin morphing into a crown. It captures the duality of her legacy. From the arena to the purple, she transformed the personal into the political. If you found this story compelling, subscribe for more investigations into figures who turned trauma into instruments of governance. Consider what it means when empathy is purchased and when law enshrines spectacle. The last line of her life reads like an admonition and a warning. Power shaped by pain will always remember where it learned to command.